everybody. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Tiffany Miranda, and I'm the very proud founder of Girls Make Beats. And I'm so excited to be a part of this amazing Grid Summit. And we have a lot of great stuff in store for you. So I'm hoping you guys were able to download the Ableton software so you can follow along with the awesome beats we're going to be learning today. So just to give you a little background on myself and the organization, I started the organization nearly 8 years ago in Miami. We have a focus on empowering young girls to become music producers, DJs, and audio engineers, because statistically, women and girls are highly underrepresented in those fields, accounting for less than 3% of audio engineers and less than 2% of music producers. So definitely a huge need to have our female voices heard in our music. So Girls Make Beats is all about empowering girls to do so. So today we are going to get into making a simple beat with Ableton. Ableton is what you call a DAW, which is a digital audio workstation. There are several DAWs out in the market, and I highly suggest if you're just getting to music production to kind of find what's the best one for your workflow. But I personally love using Ableton. It's very user-friendly, especially if you've never made beats before. And it also has some really intuitive characteristics that are unique to Ableton, such as session view. So we're going to be talking about some key terms as we move along, and I highly suggest that you take notes and follow along as we are constructing our beat. Awesome. So as you can see on my screen, I have Ableton open. This is the first window that you're going to see when you open Ableton. There's two main windows in Ableton. You have the session view, and if you hit the tab button or the tab key, you're going to see the arrangement view. So you can toggle between those two. Another thing you want to keep mention of is that as you are diving into music production and audio engineering in these fields, there's a whole lingo that goes with it. So you want to be sure to pick up some of these key terms. The word toggle means that you're switching between. This often means you're using the same key and you're just using it to toggle from one option to the other. So in this case, we're using tab, we're toggling from the session view to arrangement view. Okay, so we're actually going to be working in session view. Session view is really unique. Most DAWs that you'll see are linear as in arrangement view. So that means the tracks are stacked one on top of another. If you notice in session view, it's very unique because the tracks are stacked vertically side by side. And this gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes to working with loops and being creative and coming up with ideas, and what really makes this particular DAW a lot of fun. Okay. So when you open up Ableton, you have two MIDI tracks and two audio tracks. So what is MIDI and what is audio? What's the difference? Again, these are key terms, so I highly suggest you take these notes. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Audio is basically a track that you would utilize to record incoming audio, whether it's a mic or to play back something that's already been pre-recorded. MIDI gives you a lot more flexibility than audio in the sense that you're able to change things on the fly, because what MIDI actually is commands being sent to the computer. So it tells the computer things like which note to play, duration, how long did you hold it for, right? What sound to play, velocity. Velocity is another key term, and that basically is how hard you hit the note. All right. So for our beginners, we actually have a really broad curriculum that goes really deep into music theory. But if you've never taken a music theory class before, it's okay, because you can still follow along with the format that we're going to be using today. One thing I want to touch on is there is a really awesome and fairly new program called Splice. So Splice is actually a web-based place for producers to find sounds. You can find things like sound packs. So what are sound packs? This is another key term. Sound packs are sounds that are curated together, and it can be a plethora of different types of sounds. It can be one-shots. One-shots are things that play once, something like this, right? You have loops. Loops sound like what it is. They basically are intended to loop and play over and over again. And these can be musical loops comprised of melodies or chord progressions, or it can also be percussion loops where there's already a predefined drum pattern. You can also have really cool things like presets for plugins and things like that. So Splice is a really, really awesome resource for sounds. The other great thing about using Splice is that it allows you to pick and choose the sounds that you like. Initially, when you're working with the sounds that come with a software program like Ableton Live, you get the very kind of generic stock sounds, right? So think of a car. When you get a car that's stock, you don't really have all the bells and whistles. You have what you need, but you're not going to get the leather interior and things like that. So it's the same thing when it comes to sounds and softwares. You really, as a producer, have to invest in the quality of your sounds. So in the traditional world of doing that, that was done more so with purchasing third-party plugins. There's companies like Native Instruments. And again, I would write these things down because this is kind of the culture of being a music producer and knowing the hot sounds on the market. So traditionally, you had companies like Native Instruments who made their plugins. Omnisphere is another one made by Spectrasonics. There's a plethora of really, really cool plugins out in the market. And when Splice came out, it kind of changed the game. And the reason that is because now you can pick and choose the sounds that you want, and you don't have to basically take up space on your hard drive using stuff that you might never use. And also it's subscription based. So you basically pay a monthly fee and you're able to go in there, and they're now working with some of the biggest producers in the market. I personally love like the Murder Beats sound packs, super dope. I use it in a lot of my beats. But so that's our introductory to where we're going to be getting our sounds from. And I believe you may also be able to get a free trial or a certain amount of credits for your first time signing up. I've had Splice for quite a while, so my credits have added up. The good thing is you don't lose them. And the other great thing is that this is royalty free. What does that mean? So as a music producer, you have to be very cautious when you are sampling music or taking pieces of art from somebody else's music, right? You can actually run into all kinds of copyright infringement issues, and you definitely don't want that. So the beauty of using Splice is that you're able to use these sounds and they're absolutely royalty free. So that's really big plus. So as you're navigating Splice, you would just go to splice.com. We're going to go over to sounds. And this is once you've created your account and logged in. And you can see here that there are curated sound packs, and these are constantly being updated, which is pretty cool. So you may even find some of your favorite producers already partnered with them, and you can grab some of their really awesome sounds. It also has a really awesome kind of filter process. So let's say you're looking for a very specific thing. Let's go to instruments. Okay. And let's say I'm not a keyboard player. I am a keyboard player, but let's just say, for instance, I was not a keyboard player. I don't have a lot of experience with music theory, and I just want some inspiration, and I want to put some sound together and make it my own. This is where loops come in handy. So let's just say for right now, I want to look for something with, let's go with some pads. Pads are under the category synth. Synth is another keyword that you want to be familiar with as a music producer and an audio engineer. It's basically short for synthesizer. And if you take that keyword synth, it's like synthetic, right? So it is typically instruments that are made with electricity to either emulate another sound in the acoustic world or to create a brand new sound. So we're going to be working with synths here. I'm looking for pads. I'm going to further refine my search. So I'm going to go to where it says more. And let's say I'm looking for something with chords. let's say that I want to look in a particular BPM. Maybe, I don't want it to be too slow. So BPM also is a keyword. If you're not aware of what BPM is, it's beats per minute. So I'm going to go in the realm of maybe, I don't know, 64 to like 120. Let's update that. You'll see it further refines the results here. And I can just start taking a listen, seeing if I hear anything that sounds cool. I'm not hearing anything that immediately catches my ear, but let's say you did like something, you can actually go ahead and like it. So I actually have a whole folder here of likes. So I can work off stuff that I've already listened to prior, and I'll show you how to use that. So let's say if I grab this one. I really like that one. That one's pretty cool. I mean, you could literally get lost for hours just going through some of these sounds. They're so cool. But we're going to work first with this loop right here. This is the vocal whistle. And when you take a look at these files, they give you some metadata. Metadata is another keyword. Metadata is basically information about your file. So it shows you here that this is at 125 BPM. It's categorized as a vocal whistle, and it's in the key of E minor. Okay. So in order to transfer this file into Ableton Live, what I've done is I've downloaded the plugin version of Splice, and that's on my computer here. You'll see it right here. And so basically this is linked to, I can work within the plugin as well. I feel like there's a little more flexibility working from the web-based browser. But once I have a sound that I want to use, let's say I wanted to use this one, I'm going to use 1 credit to get it. So we're going to download that. I also want to stress that it's really important to learn quick keys as you are building your workflow as a producer. A lot of times when you have creative ideas, they can come and go in an instant, and you don't want to spend too much time fumbling around the computer trying to figure out, how to do something. So as we move along, I'll also be showing you some of my favorite quick keys that help me navigate through the programs fairly quickly. So one of my favorite ones that I use every day is Command Tab. And what that does is it allows you to toggle between the open applications that you have, because more than likely you're working on a laptop, it's a limited screen real estate. So you want to be able to move between these applications fairly quickly without having to dive down into the dock every time. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to look at Splice, and there it is right there. This is, again, the Splice plugin that I've installed on my computer, and it is linked to the software when I'm logged into it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this to the clipboard. If you take a look right here, I'm going to go copy to clipboard. And check out how simple Ableton makes this for you. So if this is the first sound that you're working with, and we're going to again use quick keys to get it into the program. So copy to clipboard basically did like a Command C. It copied it into our internal clipboard on the computer. So we would go over to Live. We're going to go to an audio track because we're dealing with pre-recorded audio. Okay. And we're going to hit Command V. And there it is. And then the beauty of it, I'm just going to undo that for 1 second because I want you to keep an eye here. The BPM by default in this DAW is 120. It's normally that for most DAWs, but it's 120. If you notice, the beauty of what Ableton does for you I went ahead and Command V that. And if you're on PC, anytime I say Command, you want to use Control. So Control C, Control V. And I'm using a Mac, so I'm using Command V. And here it is. It automatically moved the BPM to the existing BPM of this loop. So let's take a listen to that. Awesome. So we have a cool little melody loop for some inspiration here. The next thing I want to walk you through is creating your drum racks. One of the most important things about being a music producer, again, like I said, is your sound selection and sound quality, but it's also extremely important to be very aware of your drum sounds, especially in genres like hip hop, where that is kind of the driving energy is the drums. So there's some rookie mistakes that people make when they're first making beats, and part of that is not selecting high quality kicks and snares. So we're going to just briefly talk about the various sounds. If you go to drums on the left-hand panel here, you're going to notice that you have all of these kits. Again, these are stock sounds. So I don't always suggest them. We're going to just work with it just for a brief moment, just so we can kind of go through all the various sounds of the drum set, which many of you may already be familiar with, but for those of you who don't know, we're just going to quickly go over that. So I can go over here and preview. Let's say I like this one. All I have to do to load it is double click on it. And there it is. Okay. And then you can go through each individual sound and just kind of get familiar with what they sound like. That's a kick. This would be rim, snare, clap, and so on. Okay. All right. So again, like I said, I don't always highly suggest using the core kit or the stock sounds when it comes to kicks and snares and things like that. So we're actually going to beef this up a little bit. So what I've done is I have actually downloaded a sound pack from the superstar producer Murda Beats, who has produced from everybody to the Migos to Drake, literally everybody in the industry. And I really like his sounds. So we take a look here. Go through and open and close the folders, okay, using your arrow keys on your keyboard, okay? So if you right click and go down, okay? I'm getting a mirrored sound on this. Okay, you will be able to go through your different sound packs here that included the claps. These are all one-shots again. One-shots are something that are intended to basically just play one time through, and then you can create a loop based off of those one-shots. So here you see my claps, hats, kicks, open hats, perks, snares, and so on. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and replace this kick. We're getting just a little bit of a mirror on the sound, so hopefully it doesn't play back double. But here we are. We can go through some of these kicks, and these are really high quality kicks, okay? It is extremely easy to swap out the sounds on the drum rack for something else. And there's several ways to do it. In Ableton, there's several ways to do just about everything. But one of the ways is you can actually just take the file and drag it right into the square that you want it to replace. Okay. As you saw, it kind of went through different grids here because Ableton allows you to place sounds on each one of these grids. So just make sure that you're in the one that is highlighted that lets you know that there's sounds already in that particular grid. And then also another thing to be careful of is to not just double click the sound that you're trying to replace, because this is what will happen. And this is a rookie move. A lot of times when people are first using Ableton and they're getting the hang of dragging sounds into the drum rack, they'll often double click, and then what will happen is it'll take over the entire track with that one sound and just play it in different pitches. So that's not what we want. So I'm going to Command Z, that's our quick key for undo. Okay. And I'm going to also look for a good snare. We can do a snare and a clap. So I'm going to put my snare there, and I'm going to look for a clap. You can also build these drum racks from scratch as well. So let me just show you that as well. So I'm going to delete by selecting the bar up here. I'm going to just delete this. Let me show you how to create from scratch as well. So you're going to go to drums, and instead of selecting actual kit, you're just going to double click on this that says drum rack. And there you have an empty drum kit. And then I'll just go back. The way I was able to access this, again, it's extremely important to come up with a quick workflow. So there's things that you can do to make obtaining your sounds really fast. Aside from the copy and paste from the Splice plugin, for some of these sounds that are already internally on your computer, you can go to Add Folder. And here is where you would navigate to whatever folder it is that you have your sounds in. Okay. And it would show up here in your favorites menu in the left-hand bar. Okay, so then that way, every time I open up a drum rack and I want to access specific folders on my drive, I already have that favorite folder saved. So again, just really quickly, if I wanted to, for instance, use this clap, we're going to put it here. We're going to load a hi-hat. Let's do a closed hat. Cool. And then we're going to look for a kick. I also highly suggest working with some quality speakers and quality headphones. They're definitely worth the investment. Reason being is because you'll get a truer sound of what your mix is sounding like, so that it doesn't sound one way when you're listening to it, you know, in your home, and then you play it for somebody, an executive or an artist you're trying to pitch to, and it just doesn't translate well. So it's really important to invest in your sound and invest in your system. Okay, so we're gonna use that kick. All right, so one of my favorite things about Ableton when I first started using it was this little keyboard right here. And the reason that is because prior to being able to trigger MIDI notes with your typing keyboard, you would have to have an external board to trigger these sounds, an external MIDI controller, whether it was a drum pad machine or a keyboard or something to trigger the sounds, which always required additional expenses and then also space. So if you were, you know, on an airplane or something like that and you were inspired, you know, it would definitely take up a lot more space and be more of a difficult task to put together. But in this case, with Ableton, you have this little keyboard function that turns your typing keyboard into a MIDI controller, okay? So I'm actually able to trigger the sounds from my computer, okay? And just be aware of where it is when you're triggering the MIDI data. You see this little yellow light here. It's indicating that there's no sounds on that particular row that I'm trying to trigger with the letter A on my typing keyboard. So you can use Z or X. Z is going to go down an octave every time. X would go up an octave on that grid, okay? And that goes with instrument sounds as well. Okay, so now my typing keyboard has turned into a little MIDI keyboard. So if you take a look here, I'm not able to all this, right? I might want to add a little bit more. So I have a clap. I might go ahead and add a snare as well. So right now the letter A is triggering the kick. W is triggering the clap. Is triggering that hat. Is triggering that snare. Okay. All right, and then you can just spend some more time, and you have at least 16 squares here, and then like I said, it's virtually so many different grids that you can apply more sounds to. Okay. Something that I like to do with this particular type of sound is I typically would work with it in half time, which would be half of 125. That way the snare would fall on the 2 and the 4. But for time's sake and without making things too complicated, just know that when you see that something is double the number of what it actually feels like, it's generally the snare or the clap will fall on the 3. So just an FYI on that, okay? So we're gonna get ready to go ahead and program some drum sounds. So there's, again, multiple ways to do this. So we can actually record these live. So if I had an idea, I could do like, since we are having a little bit of latency, I'm going to go ahead and program them on the computer with my pencil, okay? So in order to do that, you basically would click in this area here on the drum rack, right? These are called your slots. All of these are slots. If you double click in a slot, you create a clip on a MIDI track, okay? And if you notice, when you open up this MIDI track, you get, or this MIDI clip, you get this cool little grid down here, and you'll notice that your sounds are all stacked on top of each other over here. If you want to take a quick listen to what they sound like, you can activate this preview button right here. It looks like a little pair of headphones. And you click on the virtual keyboard. Okay. Again, since we are working in double time, this is a 125 BPM loop. I'm going to take a look at this grid. And by default, it's set to 1/16. Again, we have a music theory class that goes, dives really deep into rhythmic values, but just for a real brief example of that, and some of you may recall this from music class, but you have your quarter notes, you have eighth notes, 16th notes. Quarter notes would be counted like this. An eighth note would be half of the quarter note, so it would be right? And then you have a 16th note, which is double the time of the eighth note. That's 1 E and a. So you have to fit all of that in there between those numbers. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, right? So by default, the grid is set to a 16th, and that's denoted here at the bottom right hand of the screen. So what that means is each one of these little squares gets the name of that value. So for the 16th, we said it's 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, okay? And if you notice, there's a timeline here that denotes those values as well. So 1 E and 2, you see it says 1.2. Like I said, because this is like a feel of halftime or double time, I'm going to be working in half. So I'm going to put the snare or the clap on this 3, on the 1.3, and see what that sounds like. To do that, there's actually several ways of doing that as well. You can either double click with your arrow, or I find it a lot easier to use the pencil tool. So you can toggle to the pencil tool by using the letter B. So B will toggle from the arrow, to the pencil. Okay. So we're going to go over here, and you can see this is the lane with the clap. So I'm going to just right there. I'm going to turn this preview on because I already know what sounds I'm working with. And in order to play this, you'll notice if you press play, it doesn't automatically trigger. You have to do something called triggering the clip, and you do that by clicking the play button on it. Value, I'm going to change the value. Right now it says 1/16, right? I want to do an 1/8 note across, right? So to do that really fast, I'm going to show you a couple more cool quick keys. Command 2. Oh, 1 second. So if you're selected in here and you hit Command 2, you notice it'll make this a wider value, right? So I just turned it to an 1/8 note by hitting Command 2. Every time you hit Command 2, it's going to get wider and wider, the grid, right? So just be very cautious of that. And then Command 1 would actually halve the grid, right? It's going to make that grid smaller and smaller, and you can get in there and draw tinier rhythmic values. But in this case, I want to just drag my pencil across and hear what an 1/8 note sounds like. So I'm going to toggle again to the letter B. Here goes my lane with the hi-hat. Now, if you notice, this is on a 1-bar repeat or 1-bar loop by default. That's not really ideal, right? As music producers, you want to always think of yourself as creating sonic art for people to experience. So what happens is when you're not working with variations or things loop over too quickly, the listener gets what's known as ear fatigue, and they will think it's cool for a minute, but then afterwards it's just playing over and over again, and it doesn't, it doesn't come out very well. So when dealing with drums, I highly suggest that you work with at least a 4-bar loop. So to change the length of the loop, you'll notice here in this bottom left section, it says 1 bar, right? And let's say I think this is cool what I did so far, but I want to switch up the way the kick is going to come in. So I'm going to go to duplicate loop. And look at that. It went from 1 bar to 2 bars, and it transferred over all my data. I'm going to do it again because I want it to be at least 4 bars. Okay. And then I already know I want the kick to come in differently throughout the beat. So I'm going to listen to that. Okay, cool. So just like that, I was able to create a really quick drum pattern. Another thing that I want you to be conscious and aware of as you're creating is just some basic mixing concept techniques, right? Because again, you want to stay in a creative workflow and mindset, and you don't want things sounding distorted. You want to take note that when you open up Ableton, you have what's called a master track. So master track is where all of the tracks meet, right? And all of those signals are summed up and sent out to the speakers or your headphones, right? So what happens is each one of these tracks take up space. I always like to consider this kind of like making like a, I don't know, a chicken stew, right? And again, this is a big rookie mistake that a lot of first-time producers make. They just keep raising the volume of everything, and then before you know it, the master track is in distortion mode. So one of the habits you want to learn very early on is being cautious of your headroom. The headroom is all of the summed signals being sent to this master, and you'll notice signals are together. If I kept on raising the volume of these, it would start to go into the red, which creates that digital distortion, and it does not sound pretty at all. And it can actually even ruin your speakers. So you want to be very aware of this very early on. Again, this is a basic mixing technique. So what I like to do, like I said, is think of it as like a stew, right? And the actual drums, at least in hip hop, this is going to vary amongst different genres that you're working with. But as it pertains to hip hop, the drums are what really drives the listener, right? The kick, the snare, the 808, right? And 808, by the way, is another key term you want to know. It's basically a synthesized drum that allows you to get into those sub bass frequencies. And that's what, you know, rattles the car and, you know, all that good stuff. So the 808s, all of that, you want it all to live together nicely. So again, the drums in hip hop music are going to be the meat and potatoes inside your pot, right? Think of the pot as the master. That's your headroom. So as you're adding elements in, it's going to take up more space in the pot, right? So you want to make sure that that pot gets all the way to the closest amount that it can get without toppling over, okay? And that'll ensure that you have a good level and that your music doesn't play lower than other people's music. And that's a whole other concept with mastering. But there's some initial things that you can do just to make sure that your stuff is sounding clean as you're creating and that your drums are really hitting, right? And so to do that, what I like to do is go over to our master track and we're going to put the lid on the pot, okay? So putting the lid on the pot means we're going to put something called a limiter. A limiter is that lid. It's going to make sure that nothing spills over. So if you go over to the right-hand side to instruments, audio effects, you'll see that Ableton comes with a plugin for limiter. And there's several ways to get it to the master. You can either select the master name and then double click it and it'll map it to that. Or you can simply drag and drop it onto the track. Try that again. My mouse is acting funny. There we go. Okay, so that's just going to be our lid on our pot, right? And again, we want all of our ingredients to live together nicely without spilling over, right? And we want the kick and the snare and the drums to really be the meat and potatoes, but we don't want it to get at the top of the pot. These are the individual tops of that pot. So we want to give it the lion's share of the room, right? But we want everything else to kind of live nicely with it. So a technique that I use, I've also been an audio engineer for over a decade. I've been really fortunate to engineer for people like Rick Ross, DJ Khaled, Lil Uzi Vert, French Montana. So I learned quite a bit about audio engineering and got my certification in Pro Tools. So I'm giving you guys some real gems here. And like I said, some rookie mistakes that a lot of producers make when they're first starting beats. So again, we're going to make sure that that kick and snare is hitting the lion's share of the pot, but not taking up the whole pot. And then I like to lower the volume of anything else that I'm bringing in. So let's hit play and listen to what that sounds like there. I'm still very much in the preliminary stages of this beat, right? I'm just working with the melody loop and a drum loop that I put together. I can add all kinds of other cool stuff in here. So let's just for a second take a look at some of the other loops I already have in my computer. I'm going to go for hat loop. There's some really cool hi-hat loops so that it's not just, you know, very straight. Straight is cool too, but it can give you variations in the pitch and the frequencies and the rhythmic values and things like that. So I'm going to listen to some of these other hats I have. And the cool thing about Ableton is you don't have to guess what it's going to sound like. The browser is actually automatically warping the audio to play in the BPM of our current session. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Actually, before I do that, let me show you one other cool thing. So as we talked about earlier, it's really important to have variation in your music so that you're creating this sonic experience for your listeners over time, right? I always say that not utilizing the time that you're given in that 3 minutes is like being an artist and you have a huge canvas, right? And you're like, I'm just going to draw right in the middle. I'm not going to use the height. I'm not going to use my width. And a lot of that is also mixing techniques and how you can sonically make those things happen. But you know, you have 3 minutes of somebody's attention. What do you want them to see? What do you want them to see with their ears? What do you want them to experience, right? So you want to make sure that you have variation so that you're moving along the timeline during your beat, okay? So one way of doing that is changing up your drum pattern, right? So I'm going to remove the hi-hat off of this one so I can add in an option of another hi-hat. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm select the clip that I created here, right? And you can also toggle between the 2 views here. You have your device view, and if you hit Shift Tab, you're going to see clip view. So device view will show you the plugin you're using. Clip view will show you any MIDI data that you have on that MIDI track, if it's a MIDI track, or any audio you may have if it's an audio track. Okay. So in this case, I want to select the clip. I'm going to use another quick key. We're going to do Command D. If you notice, it created another clip, and it is an exact duplicate of that previous clip. What I'm going to do now, though, I'm going to very quickly change it. So I can do that by selecting all of the sounds, and you can do that by selecting the sound by its little MIDI note here. This is called a piano roll. So I'm going to select the hi-hat, and I'm going to hit 0. So what I've done is this particular clip has the information with the MIDI data. With the hi-hat MIDI data. And this one has that particular hat muted. So over time, I can listen to it. Now are going to happen to this particular clip instead of the previous. And now I can even start to experiment with other hi-hat sounds, right? So let's take a listen to that. But I want to hear it while it's playing. So again, like I said, Ableton has the beautiful feature and function of being able to automatically warp these samples as we're rehearsing them. So let's take a listen. And we're going to use our up and down arrows to cycle through these samples. So let's see if I find. Let's say I want to use that loop, right? We can actually just drag this to another audio track. You want to make sure that you drag it to a separate audio track, right? Because the way session view works is if clips are on top of each other, you can only play one or the other. If you send them to a separate track, then you can mix and match them together. So that'll make more sense once I actually press play. But let's take a listen to this. Again, I'm going to volume down so it's not all the way to the top of the top. Right now. Cool. And let's say I wanted to also maybe even here. Let's say it was like, you know, I really like that. Which one was that? Here with me playing. So also to stop a clip, so that it's not constantly looping, you have to press the stop button either underneath it on a slot underneath it or on the actual track itself here. And that'll stop the clip. I think it was that one. optionally under the hi-hat, because ideally I'm not going to have these hi-hats playing at the same time. They're both very busy patterns. So I would be playing one or the other. So now if you take a look at where I'm at, I can switch between all these different patterns, and I'm going to actually transfer this over into arrangement view. So again, we talked about that earlier today. You can toggle between the main views by going from session view to arrangement view with the tab key on your keyboard, okay? There's a few things you want to be conscious of. Okay, so when you're in session view, you're still kind of just throwing paint at the canvas, you're playing with ideas. Once you're ready to move this into an arrangement so that you can bounce it down and allow people to listen to it. Bouncing means basically taking all of these individual files that are made in the DAW and turning them into a stereo file that can be played as a WAV file or an MP3, so you can play it like in stereo systems and email them or whatnot. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and just check a few things. We're going to make sure that our timeline is at 111 by pressing stop. We're also going to stop all of these clips here. So on the master, to do that quickly, we're going to go to the master track and hit stop. If you notice, all of those green lights just went dim. And that'll give me control over what is going to play and when. Okay, so in this case, our goal is to go from session view and commit it to an arrangement view on the timeline, right? We're going to do that with the session arrangement record button. Ableton is also really unique because it has two record buttons. It has a record button for recording directly into your clip in session view, or to commit it to the timeline, which is the session arrangement button. And that's this solid circle here. So I'm going to make sure that we have a little count in here before get started. It's set to 1 bar, and I'm going to be ready to trigger these clips. Okay, awesome. So now if I hit the tab key and I look over here, I'm just going to delete this track so I'm not using it. You'll see that everything I did is there on the arrangement view. It's just grayed out because right now it's still playing whatever was looped in session view. In order for this to play from the arrangement view, you're going to see this little button that pops up whenever anything from session is playing. And this is called the back to arrangement button. We're going to go ahead and trigger that. And as you can see, there goes all of our loops on the timeline. And now we have the ability to play it back as we just did, or we can do some further editing, which is also a lot of fun. If you notice, you have 3 main edit tools. If you go towards the middle of a clip, it becomes the arrow, and it serves as kind of like a cursor where you can select stuff and delete it and whatnot. I'm going to Command C that. If you go towards the end of the clip, you can extend outwards, and it'll create iterations of that loop. An iteration is basically a copy of itself. You notice a little tick every time it copies itself fully for that loop. And then you also have the hand tool. So if you hover over the clip at the top, it turns into a little hand, and you can move stuff around. Okay, so I actually wanted my drums to stop right about here. And I'm just going to do a little tweaking, play it one more time. There's lots of fun stuff you can do as you get more advanced with adding automation, which is recording movements or changing of a parameter. So you can, add reverbs and change them over time, or filters and things like that. Actually, we have 2 minutes. I could probably show you really quickly. I'm going to go over to audio effects. I'm going to come over here, X out of that, and go to auto filter, which is a lot of fun. And then I can right click on frequency, show automation. I'm going to get out of pencil and turn this to an arrow. And I'm going to just create this little dip here. And we're going to listen to what that does. And let's take a listen to our beat. And I'm going to move out of automation mode with this. Awesome. And that's how we make a beat in Ableton. I hope everybody really enjoyed the workshop today and took a lot of notes and is inspired to create some awesome music. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm Tiffany from Girls Make Beats. You can check us out at Girls Make Beats on Instagram and learn how to get involved and register at www.girlsmakebeats.org. Thank you so much to the Grid Summit for having me today.